Officer Kane Williamson adjusted his regulation-perfect collar in the cracked mirror of his HAB unit, movements precise and practiced from years of service. The chrome SecForce badge caught the harsh fluorescent light, its gleam a mockery of the darkness he carried inside. He traced the familiar emblem, the Unity Party's intertwined circles representing order through harmony, and fought back the wave of revulsion that threatened to break his carefully maintained composure. 3 levels below, in detention block 17, his wife Maya and daughter Lynn were beginning another day of rehabilitation, the government's favorite euphemism for political imprisonment. The thought of them in their stark white cells made his hands shake, but he forced them steady. Weakness wasn't an option. Not here. Not now. The morning news feeds flickered across his vision through his mandatory neural interface, bathing the dingy room in a ghostly blue glow. Thought crime rates down 60% following enhanced enforcement. His stomach clenched. The words might as well have been written in his family's blood. He'd been the one to report them, following protocol when Maya had spoken against the Unity Party at Lynn's school. She'd only been trying to defend their daughter, who'd questioned why the history texts never mentioned the world before the party. One small moment of maternal protection, and their lives had shattered. It had been that or immediate execution. Policy was clear on that point. At least this way they lived. At least this way he could still see them during regulated visitation hours, could still hope for their eventual release. Even if Maya's eyes no longer met his, even if Lynn's once bright smile had dimmed to nothing. Williamson straightened his spine, checked his weapon harness one final time. The weight of the badge seemed to increase with each passing day, a constant reminder of his chains, but he would bear it. He had to. In New Columbia's endless towers, survival meant compromise, and love meant sacrifice. The door to his HAB unit slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Another day of service to the system that held his heart hostage. Another day of being the perfect officer, the loyal servant, the betrayer of everything he once believed in. For his family, he would do it all again tomorrow. Officer Williamson, Director Voss's voice cut through the sterile air of New Columbia's upper spire like liquid nitrogen. The director sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, the city's endless sprawl visible through the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. From this height, the lower levels were nothing but a haze of smoke and neon, their inhabitants as insignificant as insects. Williamson stood at attention, hands clasped behind his back, uniform creases knife-sharp. He knew better than to speak until spoken to. Director Voss was one of the old guard, enhanced with so much chrome and biotech that his humanity was more rumor than fact. His augmented eyes, iridescent orbs that shifted color with his mood, studied Williamson with predatory intensity. At ease, Voss said finally, though there was nothing easy about his tone. He gestured to a holoscreen that materialized between them, displaying surveillance footage from the Undercity. We have a situation in Sector 274C. Gang activity, but not the usual sort. Their leader. He flicked his wrist, and the image zoomed in on a figure moving through the crowds. Goes by Phoenix. Williamson studied the grainy footage. The figure was tall, moved with purpose, face hidden beneath a hood decorated with glowing circuit patterns. Standard criminal enterprise, sir. Voss's eyes shifted to a deep crimson. If only. Intelligence suggests she's organizing more than just the usual protection rackets and black market operations. There are whispers of sedition. The last word carried the weight of a death sentence. Find her, bring her in. Alive. A pause hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Then Voss leaned forward, his chrome-laced fingers steepled beneath his chin. And Williamson? Your family's review period is coming up in 3 months. Success here would reflect favorably on their rehabilitation progress. The meaning was clear. Success meant a chance at seeing his family freed sooner. Failure. Williamson suppressed a shudder, remembering the last time an officer had disappointed Director Voss. They'd found pieces of his family scattered across 3 different levels. I understand, Sir Williamson replied, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. I'll begin immediately. See that you do. Voss turned to the window, a clear dismissal. And Williamson? Remember, the Unity Party rewards loyalty above all else. As Williamson left the upper spire, his boots echoing on marble floors, He felt the familiar weight of compromise settling onto his shoulders. Another hunt, another soul to feed to the machine. But he would do it, would do anything, if it meant saving his family from the sterile hell of detention block 17. In his mind, he could already hear Maya's voice. At what cost, Kane? At what cost? He had no answer. He never did. The descent into New Columbia's Undercity was like sinking through layers of history, each level telling its own story of decay. Williamson's boots echoed on corroded walkways as he passed through the security checkpoints, watching the sterile white walls of the upper city give way to rusted metal and crumbling concrete. Level by level, the transformation became more pronounced. The soft blue lighting of the administrative sectors faded into harsh reds and purples from ancient neon signs. The crisp air, purified for the elite, thickened with the smell of illegal food stalls and bootleg tech. Steam hissed from jury-rigged pipes, creating an ever-present fog that made his uniform's environmental filters work overtime. At Checkpoint 47B, the last official Unity Party outpost before Sector 274C, the guard gave him a knowing look. "Long way from home, officer," she said, scanning his credentials. "Not many badges venture down this deep without backup." Williamson said nothing, but they both knew why he was alone. Solo missions like this were tests as much as assignments. Success meant promotion. Failure meant, well, there was a reason the Unity Party had an entire department dedicated to family rehabilitation. Past the checkpoint, the true Undercity revealed itself. Children with glowing circuit tattoos scattered at his approach, disappearing into gaps in the walls that probably led to unofficial HAB units. Street vendors quickly covered their wares the real food that was forbidden up above, not the synthetic nutrients the party distributed. A group of workers trudged past, their faces masked against the toxic fumes from the processing plants below, bodies enhanced with crude cybernetics to help them handle the brutal labor. One of them caught his eye, and Williamson saw a flash of hatred before the man looked away. Down here, a Sec Force badge wasn't a symbol of authority, it was a target. The further he descended, the more the Unity Party's grip loosened. Illegal tech shops operated openly, their windows displaying augmentations that would earn a death sentence in the upper levels. Music the real kind, with rhythm and soul, not the approved harmony frequencies, leaked from hidden clubs. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that spoke of desperation and possibility in equal measure. Williamson paused on a walkway, looking down through the metal latticework at the levels still below. Somewhere in this maze of steel and shadow, Phoenix was building more than just a criminal enterprise. He could feel it in the way people moved, in the whispered conversations that stopped when he passed, in the subtle signs of organization amid the chaos. His neural interface buzzed, a reminder of the tracking software monitoring his every move. Above him, the upper city's gleaming spires were barely visible through the haze, like distant stars. Below, the Undercity stretched down toward the planet's core, a world unto itself. He checked his weapon, more from habit than necessity. Down here, the real dangers weren't the ones you could shoot. The real dangers were the thoughts that crept in when you saw how the other half lived, the questions that arose when you witnessed the cost of the party's perfect order. Questions like the ones that had sent his family to detention block 17. Taking a deep breath of the filtered air from his uniform supply, Williamson continued his descent. He had a job to do, a target to find, a family to save. The price of loyalty was high, but he would pay it. Even if it meant adding another soul to the Unity Party's ledger of broken dreams. The tip came from a synthetic noodle vendor whose stall reeked of real garlic, a banned substance that would have meant immediate arrest in the upper levels. But down here, Williamson knew that enforcing minor infractions would only close doors he needed open. The fighting pit, the old man had whispered, not meeting Williamson's eyes as he handed over a steaming bowl. Phoenix makes appearances there, keeps the peace on fight nights a pause, then not that I know anything about illegal gatherings, officer. Now, hidden in the shadows of a maintenance corridor, Williamson watched the crowds filter into what was officially designated as Storage Facility 274C-118. The fighting pit lived up to its name. A makeshift arena had been carved out of an old waste processing chamber, rings of scaffolding creating terraces where spectators could stand. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and machinery oil, punctuated by the crackling of bootleg light strips. That's when he saw her. Phoenix moved through the crowd like electricity through a circuit, her presence sending ripples through the gathered masses. She was tall, taller than most, with broad shoulders and the fluid grace of someone augmented with high-end chrome. A long scar ran from her left temple to jaw, glowing faintly with what looked like bioluminescent healing tech. But it was her eyes that caught Williamson's attention. They burned with something he hadn't seen since the days before his wife's arrest. Purpose. She stopped to speak with a group of workers, their mining exoskeletons still caked with debris from the lower levels. Her hand touched shoulders, her words too low to hear but leaving people standing straighter, looking braver. Credits exchanged hands, but Williamson could tell it wasn't the usual protection money. The workers' grateful expressions spoke of something else entirely. Magnificent, isn't she? A voice beside him made Williamson start. A young woman had materialized from the shadows, her face decorated with shifting digital tattoos. The way she gives people hope. Williamson kept his expression neutral. Hope's a dangerous commodity in New Columbia. The woman's tattoos rippled with what might have been amusement. Everything worth having is dangerous. Officer, she emphasized his title with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But you already know that, don't you? Before he could respond, a roar went up from the crowd. In the arena, 2 fighters had taken their positions. Phoenix stood between them, her voice carrying over the din. Remember the rules. We fight to prove our strength, not to destroy each other. We have enough enemies above without becoming enemies to each other. The words sent a chill down Williamson's spine. This was no mere gang leader keeping order over illegal fights. The way the crowd hung on her words, the organization evident in even this outlawed gathering. Phoenix was building something. Something that Director Voss was right to fear. The young woman had vanished as silently as she'd appeared, leaving Williamson alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that this assignment was far more complicated than he'd imagined. In the arena below, the fighters began their dance, but Williamson kept his eyes on Phoenix. She was watching the crowd more than the fight, her gaze occasionally sweeping the shadows where he hid. There was intelligence in those eyes and determination, and something else aflame that the Unity Party had spent decades trying to extinguish. His neural interface buzzed again, reminding him of his duty, of his family, of the price of failure. But for the first time since Maya's arrest, Williamson felt something stir in his chest that he thought had died long ago. Hope was dangerous indeed. Days of surveillance revealed what Director Voss's intelligence had only hinted at. Yes, Phoenix's people moved contraband through the levels, but not the usual black market goods. Williamson watched from his hidden perches as they distributed medicine to those who couldn't afford the Unity Party's extortionate prices. They evacuated families from condemned HYF blocks before the demolition crews arrived. They protected small businesses from the predatory megacore that ran unchecked in the lower levels. And they were gathering weapons. His neural interface recorded everything. Of course, each observation automatically uploaded to SecForce servers. But Williamson found himself omitting certain details from his reports. The locations of the medical caches. The names of sympathetic vendors. Small things. Things that wouldn't compromise his mission but might save a few lives. He told himself it was tactical, maintaining the delicate balance of the Undercity's ecosystem. He almost believed it. On the 7th day, he tracked Phoenix to an abandoned maintenance bay deep in Sector 274C. The massive chamber had once serviced the great machines that kept New Columbia's lower levels habitable. Now it served a different purpose. Hundreds of people packed the space, their faces illuminated by salvaged light panels. Workers still in their exoskeletons. Street vendors. Even a few people wearing the faded uniforms of low-level Unity Party bureaucrats. All of them focused on the figure standing on a raised platform of salvaged metal. The Unity Party tells us we're free. Phoenix's voice carried through Williamson's directional mic with perfect clarity. They tell us that their order saved us from chaos, that their control protects us from our own worst impulses. She paused, her scarred face fierce in the harsh light. But their freedom is just another prison. They control our thoughts, our words, our very dreams. The crowd stirred, and Williamson's hands trembled on his rifle. He'd heard sedition before every SecForce officer had. But this was different. This wasn't the desperate ranting of a condemned prisoner or the drunken mumblings of a displaced worker. This was a manifesto. "Look around you," Phoenix continued. "Look at what we've built here, in the shadows of their perfect world. We heal each other when they would let us die. We feed each other when they would let us starve. We remember what they would have us forget, that we are more than numbers in their system, more than units of production in their machine." The crowd's response shook dust from the ceiling. Williamson saw faces transformed by something he recognized all too well, the same fire that had burned in Maya's eyes the day she'd defended their daughter, the day she'd spoken the words that landed her in detention block 17. "They think they've won." Phoenix's voice dropped lower, but no less intense. "They think their cameras and their neural interfaces and their rehabilitation centers have broken us. But they've forgotten something important." She smiled, and Williamson felt the weight of her words like a physical force. Fire cannot be contained. It spreads, it grows, and when it burns hot enough, even steel melts. As if on cue, screens around the chamber flickered to life, displaying weapons caches, training facilities, medical centers, and entire infrastructure of resistance hidden in the city's forgotten spaces. Not just a gang, not just a criminal enterprise, an army. Williamson's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger guard. One call to SecForce Command would bring down enough firepower to end this rebellion before it began. One call to save his family, to secure their release, to return to the simple clarity of following orders. But Maya's voice echoed in his memory, "Some prices are too high, Kane. Even for love." In the chamber below, Phoenix raised her fist. "It's time to wake up." The roar of the crowd drowned out the sound of Williamson's heart pounding in his chest. Tomorrow, he would have to decide what to put in his report, have to choose between duty and conscience once again. But tonight, just for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the heat of that dangerous flame called hope. It happened too fast. Whether someone spotted his surveillance equipment or a routine scan detected too many unauthorized gatherings, Williamson never knew. One moment, the Undercity hummed with its usual chaotic energy. The next, alert sirens shattered the artificial night. "This is SecForce Command," the announcement boomed through ancient speakers. "Sector 274C is now under martial law. All civilians must return to their designated HAB units. Resistance will be met with lethal force." Williamson's neural interface blazed with tactical data as SecForce troops poured in from above, their black armor absorbing the neon lights. Standard crowd control formation, just like in training. Except nothing about this was standard. Phoenix's people emerged from hidden tunnels and maintenance shafts like shadows taking form. They moved with military precision that spoke of months, perhaps years of preparation. The lower levels erupted into chaos. "All units converge on primary target," his commander's voice crackled through the neural link. "Phoenix is the priority. Collateral damage authorized." The words hit Williamson like a physical blow. Collateral damage. How many families would be torn apart today, just like his had been? How many children would watch their parents disappear into rehabilitation? Gunfire erupted, the sharp crack of SecForce rifles mixing with the deeper thunder of rebel weapons. Civilians scattered, their screams adding to the cacophony. Through his tactical overlay, Williamson watched red dots representing his fellow officers spread through the sector. He moved on instinct, ducking through maintenance corridors as energy weapons scorched the walls around him. A stray shot from somewhere above blew out a steam pipe, filling the corridor with scalding vapor. His uniform's environmental shields barely held. Officer Williamson, his neural interface buzzed. "Your position is diverging from tactical parameters. Return to formation immediately." He ignored it, pushing deeper into the maze of steel and shadow. His tactical overlay showed him separated from his unit, but something else pulled him forward. Intuition, experience, or maybe just fate. A hand grabbed him, pulled him into a darkened room. He spun, weapon raised, only to find himself face to face with Phoenix herself. She looked different up close. The scar on her face wasn't just bioluminescent, it was a tactical display, scrolling with data. Her eyes weren't augmented like most resistance leaders. They were purely human, and they studied him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Officer Kane Williamson," she said, her voice calm, despite the battle raging outside. "I've been watching you watch me." Williamson kept his rifle trained on her chest, trying to ignore the way his hands shook. "You're under arrest for sedition, unauthorized gathering, and trying to give people hope." She took a step forward, either not noticing or not caring about the weapon. "Tell me, Officer Williamson, what crime did your wife commit? What terrible threat to society was your daughter?" The rifle wavered. "How do you? We have people everywhere." Even in detention block 17, another step closer. Outside, an explosion rattled the walls. The Unity Party's greatest weakness is thinking they've crushed everyone's spirit. But they haven't crushed yours, have they? Not completely. I've seen it in the way you file your reports, the little details you omit, the warnings you let slip to people in our network. His neural interface screened for backup, mapping multiple approach vectors for SecForce units. Minutes, maybe seconds, before they converged on his location. Phoenix's eyes softened just slightly. "You're not alone, Officer Williamson, and neither is your family." The sounds of battle grew closer. Soon he would have to make a choice that would echo through whatever remained of his life, and through the lives of everyone he loved. "I know about your family," Phoenix said, her voice softer than Williamson had expected after months of surveillance. The battle outside felt distant now, muffled by the weight of this moment. "We have people inside the detention blocks, not just informants, operatives. We could get them out, protect them." For one heartbeat, Williamson saw it. Freedom, real freedom. Maya's smile, not the hollow thing she wore during supervised visitation hours. Lynn, growing up away from the Unity Party's indoctrination centers, allowed to ask her questions about history, allowed to think. "Join us," Phoenix pressed, taking another step forward. His rifle barrel now nearly touched her chest, but she showed no fear. "You've seen what we can do, how deep our network runs. The Unity Party isn't invincible. They're not even as strong as they want everyone to believe." Through his neural interface, Williamson watched the red dots of SecForce units converging on his position. 3 minutes, maybe 4, before they breached this level. Warning messages flashed across his vision: unauthorized proximity to target, backup required, threat assessment in progress. "Your wife protected your daughter," Phoenix continued. "She spoke up against their lies, their manipulation of children. She was right. And deep down, you know it. That's why you've been holding back in your reports, isn't it? Why you've been letting little things slip through the cracks." Williamson's mind raced to the execution videos they made all officers watch, the examples of what happened to those who betrayed the Unity Party. Not quick deaths, not merciful ones. And always, always, they started with the family. They never failed to find those who escaped. The neural interfaces made sure of that. Even if they could somehow deactivate his, the Unity Party's reach extended far beyond New Columbia. There was nowhere to hide, not really. "I can't," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "They'll kill them." The understanding in Phoenix's eyes was almost worse than condemnation would have been. "Then do what you have to do," she said quietly. "But remember this moment, Officer Williamson. Remember that you had a choice. That's more than they give most people." His tactical overlay showed SecForce units breaching the outer corridors. 60 seconds, maybe less. "If you're going to arrest me," Phoenix said, "now would be the time. Unless you'd prefer to explain to Director Voss why you hesitated when you had your target cornered." The mention of Voss sent ice through Williamson's veins. He thought of Maya and Lynn in their sterile white cells, their review period approaching. Thought of the hope in his daughter's eyes when he'd last visited, told her that maybe, just maybe, they'd be home soon. With mechanical precision, he reached for his restraints. "Turn around," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Hands behind your back." As he secured the restraints, Phoenix spoke one last time, so quietly he almost missed it. The offer stands. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'll be waiting. For you and for them." The door burst open, SecForce troops flooding in with weapons raised. Williamson had already secured the target. had already made his choice. Had already betrayed everything he knew was right, for everything he couldn't bear to lose. The firefight was still raging when Williamson led Phoenix out in restraints. Rebels called out in disbelief as their leader walked calmly beside the SecForce officer, her head held high despite the bindings. The fighting seemed to pause for a moment, the scene illuminated by the harsh glare of emergency lighting and weapons fire. Phoenix, a young rebel with glowing circuit tattoos, raised his weapon, others following suit. The air crackled with tension and the whine of charging energy weapons. Phoenix shook her head, her voice carrying across the smoky corridor. "Stand down," she ordered, her tone brooking no argument. "This isn't over." The rebels hesitated, their faces a mix of confusion and betrayal. Through his tactical overlay, Williamson could see more SecForce units converging on their position. If the rebels didn't retreat now, it would be a massacre. Phoenix seemed to know this too. "Remember what I taught you," she called out. "The flame doesn't die just because one spark is captured. Scatter, regroup, survive." The rebels began to melt away into the shadows of the Undercity, disappearing into maintenance shafts and hidden passages that weren't on any official maps. Williamson's neural interface buzzed with orders to pursue, but he ignored them. His mission was the target, just the target. As they ascended through the levels, Phoenix walked with a dignity that made the restraint seem almost irrelevant. Other SecForce officers fell in around them, forming an escort formation, but she kept her eyes forward, refusing to be treated as a mere prisoner. "You know what they'll do to me," she said quietly, her words meant only for Williamson's ears. "The interrogations. The rehabilitation. They'll try to break me, to make me give up our network a pause. Then they won't succeed." Williamson kept his face impassive, mindful of the cameras watching their ascent. "You should have stayed hidden," he replied, just as softly. "Built your life in the shadows like everyone else." Like you, there was no mockery in her tone, only sadness. Living in fear, watching everything you love slowly die inside sterile white rooms. That's not living, Officer Williamson. That's just surviving. And sometimes surviving isn't enough. They passed through another security checkpoint, moving from the dim redness of the Undercity into the harsh white light of the upper levels. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Remember this moment," Phoenix said, as they approached the final security door. "Remember you had a choice. Because you'll have more choices to make, Officer Williamson. The Unity Party isn't done testing your loyalty. They never are." The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a squad of elite SecForce troops in full tactical gear. Beyond them, Williamson could see Director Voss waiting, his augmented eyes glowing with satisfaction. "And when those moments come," Phoenix whispered, just before they took her away, "remember that the flame never dies. It just waits for the right moment to burn again." Williamson watched as they led her away, her words echoing in his mind. Below, he could still hear the sounds of conflict, of rebellion being crushed but not extinguished, never truly extinguished. He touched the badge on his chest, feeling its weight more keenly than ever. In his mind, he could see Maya's face, Lynn's smile, the hope in their eyes during his last visit. He had protected them, had done his duty. So why did victory taste so much like ash? Williamson received his commendation from Director Voss personally. The ceremony was brief, conducted in the sterile whiteness of the upper spire's main hall. Other officers watched with carefully neutral expressions as Voss pinned the silver medal to Williamson's chest, right next to his SecForce badge. "Officer Williamson's dedication to duty serves as an example to us all," Voss announced, his augmented eyes shifting through shades of pleased amber. "The Unity Party rewards loyalty above all else. As such, his family's rehabilitation period has been reduced by 5 years. 5 years! The words should have filled him with joy. Instead, they sat like cold lead in his stomach. Later, alone in his HAB unit, Williamson stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The commendation medal caught the light, throwing fractured reflections across the walls. He thought of Phoenix in her cell, probably being processed even now. Thought of the hope she'd offered, and the price of refusing it. His neural interface buzzed with updates from the ongoing operations in the lower levels. SecForce troops were still conducting sweeps, arresting suspected rebel sympathizers, confiscating unauthorized medical supplies. creating more broken families, more inhabitants for the detention blocks, more souls crushed under the weight of perfect order. But something had changed. In the week since Phoenix's arrest, reports of rebel activity hadn't decreased. If anything, they'd grown more frequent. Small acts of defiance bloomed like flowers through cracks in permacrete unauthorized food distributions, makeshift medical clinics, mysterious failures in surveillance equipment. The flame never dies. It just waits for the right moment to burn again. He removed his badge, turning it over in his hands. The Unity Party's intertwined circles seemed to mock him. How many more would he hunt down? How many more choices would he make in the name of protecting his family? The next morning, during his scheduled visitation to Detention Block 17, Maya finally met his eyes. She saw the commendation medal, understood what it meant. Her expression didn't change, but something passed between them, an unspoken question, a weight of understanding. Lynn was different too. She'd grown taller in the sterile white rooms, her face thinner, but her eyes burned with something that made Williamson's breath catch. The same fire he'd seen in Phoenix's gaze. "Dad," she whispered during their monitored embrace, "I remember what came before. No matter what they say in the education modules, I remember." He held her tighter, his heart thundering. Through the reinforced windows of the visiting area, he could see the undercity sprawling below, its shadows holding secrets and possibilities he'd only begun to understand. In the distance, warning sirens began to wail another riot, another uprising, another spark refusing to be extinguished. Williamson thought of Phoenix's words about choices, about the price of survival versus the cost of truly living. His neural interface buzzed with deployment orders. Somewhere in the endless maze of New Columbia's levels, people were fighting for freedom. And he would hunt them, would stop them, would maintain the perfect order that kept his family alive. Tomorrow he would put on his badge again, would do his duty, would pay whatever price the Unity Party demanded. But for the first time since Maya's arrest, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. One where the flames of rebellion burned hot enough to melt even the coldest chains of loyalty. One where the price of freedom wasn't measured in the weight of compromise, but in the courage to finally make a different choice. The sirens continued to wail, and somewhere in the darkness below, hope continued to burn. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.